Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Matthew Petrusek, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire show. Thank you for joining us. For decades, decline and disaffiliation have been dominating the narrative about religion in general and Catholicism in particular in the United States and throughout the West. The data has been clear. People, especially young people, have been leaving the pews in droves and presumably never coming back. Something, however, seems to have changed. As many media outlets, including secular media, have been reporting recently, both interest in and even conversion to the Catholic Church has been surging both here and in parts of Europe, especially among young adults. To be sure, secularism still dominates the culture, especially in the areas of business, entertainment, and politics. But the once common wisdom that increasingly secular society would eventually lead to the death of Christianity and its evacuation from the public square doesn't seem so common anymore. So what are the causes of this apparent religious revival among young people? Why are so many turning towards the traditional liturgies and moral teachings of Catholicism in particular? Here to discuss is Bishop Robert Barron. Welcome back to the studio, Bishop.
Matt, thank you. Always good to be with you.
So today we're looking at why so many young people are becoming Catholic, which is a very happy topic for us to engage. But before we do, you've recently concluded your first ever synod in your diocese. Tell us a little bit about what that was like and what it's leading to.
Yeah, it was delightful. It was the only second synod in the 136-year history of my diocese. We had one back in 1950, I think. And it was inspired. I went to the 2 sessions of the synod in Rome. And one thing we called for was synods at the local level in dioceses. So I thought, let's do it, but not in an open-ended way where we talk about everything and nothing gets resolved. I thought I would exercise my own shepherding by saying, let's talk about 2 things I think are most important, namely vocations to the priesthood and evangelization. So with that focus, we prepared over several months, and then representatives came from across the diocese. There were speakers, including yourself, who spoke to the group. And then we had a couple days of discussions, and we finally voted on priorities of things we can do to address these 2 issues. I loved the synod. I thought it was very prayerful. People really got into it. The table I was at was very productive. We surrounded it by prayer and liturgy.
Right.
So I thought it was a wonderful experience. Now we're in the process of kind of collating all of the findings and then making some judgments.
And how are you specifically going to use those findings?
We'll see. So just yesterday, in fact, I met with our Presbyteral Council and we reviewed some of the findings. I'll meet with all the priests in about a month from the time we're recording this, and we'll discuss it there. Also at the Pastoral Council for the whole diocese, different ways. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to write something that'll probably come out, we hope, first Sunday of Advent, that sums up the findings of the synod and tries to give a sense of direction for our diocese.
Yeah, it was a really positive experience.
Yeah, good.
Very, very
I'm glad you were there.
Yeah, very, very fruitful. So let's turn to today's topic, which again is why so many young people are becoming Catholic, and importantly, what we can do as evangelists to keep and expand the momentum. So to lay the foundation and give some context for our discussion, Bishop, a large number of secular news outlets have recently been reporting on what they see as a surge of interest in Catholicism, especially among young people. These outlets include the New York Post, Fox News, Reuters, not often identified as a pro-Catholic organization, Newsweek, The Independent, Compact, and the Free Press, among others. So to give just a few statistics, according to a New York Post article with the title, Young People Are Converting to Catholicism en masse, some dioceses are reporting year-over-year increases of 30 to 70% in recent years. And according to Fox News, in an article entitled Catholicism Sees Major Resurgence Among Gen Z, they cite a Harvard survey showing that in 1 year alone, Generation Z, who identifies Catholics, has gone up 6%, just 1 over year. That's way outside the margin of error. So, Bishop, you've been on the front lines of evangelization for well over 25 years. You've seen a load of negative data, and now we're seeing this. Sort of at a visceral level, what's your response to this apparent turn of events?
Well, I mean, I'm very delighted to see it. When I started 25 years ago, the new atheists were just kind of hitting their stride. The scandals were rampant in the church. There was a lot of negative feeling about religion. And so when we got going, it was often in a very combative, I'm still is to a large degree, but very combative sort of environment. At that time, would I have been optimistic about it? I don't know. I would have said we got a real struggle in our hands. But my feeling, Matt, at the very beginning was, let's just do it. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know the long-term effects, but let's just get into the fight. So I'm not entirely surprised, though. As I've said many times, the new atheists bequeath to young people this incredibly bleak view of life. So we don't come from anywhere, we don't go anywhere, there's no objective value, no purpose to life. Life is just, the universe is just dumbly there and so on. And also it's repugnant to these very deep instincts in all human beings. The very fact that we're like the only generation in recorded human history that has not had a transcendent referent. There have always been people that aren't religious, they don't go to church and so on. But almost everybody up until the modern West was religious in some form. And so blithely to say, as the Hitchens and Dawkins and company said, oh, well, we're done with that. It's stupid, silly, and only idiots would believe that sort of thing. Well, I mean, it goes so contrary to the deepest instincts of human beings. In that sense, it doesn't really surprise me that you're going to see now a resurgence, But another corollary to that is the deep confusion and sadness that has been measured now for at least a decade in the surveys of young people. Rising numbers of depression and anxiety, of suicide, of deep confusion. I mean, I'd put a lot of the gender business in that category too, of deep confusion about, who we are. Well, that can't sustain itself in the long run. People start looking for sources of meaning and purpose. And they'll turn to religion. Here's my conviction. I'm very glad, I'll use this word on fire as an example, there are many others, but that when people wanted to turn to religion, maybe, going to the local church, that wasn't their first idea, but they're online all the time, and they find people who are talking about faith online.
Right.
I think that should not be underestimated as a key factor in this.
It seems to be the case that the new atheists have not effectively reproduced themselves.
No.
Really, the only guy on the scene still is Sam Harris for the most part.
Bit, yeah.
Does that surprise you?
Not really, no, because again, it's such a vapid, empty view of things, and ultimately, I just hope people see this. Ultimately, irrational. They all wrap themselves in the mantle of reason and science and all that stuff. But give me a break. That the universe in its radical contingency is just self-explanatory, or it came from nothing. And that's the view of a reasonable person. That's the person wrapped in the mantle of rationality. Give me a break.
Right.
That human life has no purpose, no value. Well, it's just repugnant to our own deepest instincts. That the world that is characterized in every nook and cranny by radical intelligibility just popped into that state from nothing. To my mind, that's a supremely irrational position, recognized as such by the greatest spirits in our civilization, going all the way back to the beginning, from Plato on. I mean, people would have recognized that as a deeply irrational position. So in that way, it doesn't surprise me that when people see through that, they're going to say, no, wait a minute, that can't be right. And then they'll start turning toward religion. But again, we have to be there when they make that turn. It's very important that we be in their world when they make that turn.
Well, you've already indicated some response to this question, but let's look at it more depth. Some of the reasons, the causes for this resurgence or perhaps initial interest for the first time in Catholicism. Many, again, we're looking at secular media here, so not just Catholic sources, have pointed to the centrality of men in this interest in Catholicism. And how they're sort of leading the drive. First of all, is this something that you've seen yourself? And second, why do you think that's the case? Why is this so focused on men and their experience?
We under-challenged men for a long time. Men like challenges. We like to be given a mission, and we like it to be hard. We like it to be difficult. The church I grew up in, so back in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, was a very soft kind of church. The focus was on your feelings. It was on making excuses. Well, I know life's hard and we can't really live up to all these ideals. And so, God is love and God's forgiving, all of which is true, of course. But it was a kind of softer version of Catholicism, of Christianity. That doesn't appeal to men. I don't think it really appeals to women that much either. That's another story. But it certainly doesn't appeal to men. And that's why I think a lot of men fell away from the church. I go back to, this is a couple years ago when Jordan Peterson, and again, I didn't even know where Jordan is for sure in his religious convictions, but at the time, he's just said, you Catholics have so under-challenged your young people, and you should make it more difficult. And I've always felt that's right, you know? So I think what young men are responding to is the moral and spiritual challenge within Catholicism, the call to a heroic life, to real sanctity, not spiritual mediocrity. Oh, you're fine. I'm okay. You're okay. You know, God is love. Everything's fine. No, because God is love, he wills the good of the world and of you in particular. And that means he's calling you to an ever greater heroic self-gift. Think John Paul II now. Think of, Frassati. Think of these great saints. People respond to that, respond favorably to it as we make Catholicism more challenging, not less.
And in making Catholicism more challenging, would you say that's just presenting Catholicism more accurately, more authentically?
Well, it's the call to sanctity, right? In fact, as we record these words tonight, I'm going out to a parish about an hour from here to do a confirmation. And I always tell the kids, these are 15, 16-year-old kids, I always say, God is not interested in spiritual mediocrity. He didn't create us to be spiritual mediocrities. Think of a great coach that you had that was not satisfied with your performance, and he wanted you to be a great player, to live up to your full potential.
Right.
A teacher, the ones that we remember, the ones that were tough on us, that knew we had potential and wanted to bring it out. Those who were like, you're fine, everything's so-so, that's okay. We don't remember them, So that's real Catholicism, is calling us to be saints, not mediocrities.
Yeah, that's right on. How about the effects of COVID? The common wisdom on COVID has been that it was a disaster for religiosity in the church, and that people left and never came back. But there seems to be evidence that it's actually the opposite, perhaps because of not COVID itself, but our response to COVID, our collective response. Is this something that you're seeing?
It's interesting. Yeah, I have to think about that a little bit more. I mean, having lived through COVID, I was a bishop out in California, watching the schools, shut down. And I think we know now there was very little reason to do that.
Right.
Kids were sort of the least susceptible to COVID, but yet we isolated them at home. When we brought them together, we put them behind walls and plastic masks and all that. No, I think that was a disaster. I just simply for young people in general. Then I see, people in college age. I think the collegians during that time really suffered a lot. I think how old people disimproved the way they were isolated. Now, maybe there was more reason to isolate older people, but I think it was a disaster among young people. So in terms of religion, it's interesting. I'd have to think about that more. Maybe a reaction to, how poorly managed all that was. Reaching out again for connection. See, religion, it's all about connection. It's all about connection to God. If you're connected to God, you're connected to everything else and everybody else through God. So it's a matter of unity and family. What isolates us, therefore, is opposed to religion.
Yeah,
seems to me. So maybe there you can see a whole generation reacting.
That's come up in surveys, and the importance of physical connection, proximity to other people in particular, not just this sort of online digital connection.
Yeah, and again, I realize the irony because a lot of my ministry is through the digital, and I appreciate that very much. But we all know that feeling when you've spent like too much time with screens and through the internet. There's something that just rebels. Something in us says, no, that's not appropriate. I need real conversation, real human contact, real interaction. So maybe it's a reaction of particularly of that generation, the grade school, high school, college that endured the tumult of COVID.
What about the rise and subsequent decline, if not hopefully collapse of wokeism? This is also something that's coming out in some of the surveys. That this backlash to progressive ideology is moving people back to religion and to Catholicism in particular. Are you seeing that?
Well, I think so. I've been decrying wokeism as a scourge for a long time, which indeed it is, because it's a popularization of European critical theory, which was a very bad thing in the mid-20th century, and then worked its way into the universities and then finally to the streets and into the minds of a lot of younger people. There's a lot wrong with wokeism, but one is the pitting of us against each other.
Right.
So the division into two classes of oppressor and oppressed. and that we're obsessed almost with, now what team are you on? If you're on the oppressed team, well, then you've got to really emphasize that and say, I'm super, super, super oppressed. If I'm seen societally as on the oppressor team, well, then I'm in some serious trouble and mobs can come after me. I always think of this, man, it's like when there's a one-sided concern for justice, and justice is construed simplistically as this battle of oppressor and oppressed, what you've done is you put a sword in everyone's hand, and you've said, go after each other. And that's happened. I mean, I think go on the line any time of the day or night, and you'll see it, is people, especially young people, with swords in their hands. And wokeism has contributed, I think, terribly to that problem. So their religion is opposed to it. Catholicism is certainly based on society, connection, unity, community. We're grounded in the Trinity. We're created by a God of love who wants us to be one family. The Sermon on the Mount is opposed to this oppressor-oppressed view of the world.
Right.
Catholic social teaching is repugnant to that view of the world. I think the reaction to wokeism, and then what I've called the culture of self-invention, that's a big part of wokeism too.
Absolutely.
No objective truth, no moral truth. It's really just up to you. All that matters is your freedom. Casey versus Planned Parenthood is a sort of a propedeutic of wokeism. In the long run, it's very thin gruel, and it will not satisfy the longing of the human heart, and people will rebel against it. And when real objective value, intellectual, moral, aesthetic, is presented to people, and they realize I'm not just stuck in the little tiny space of my own freedom, my own self-defining freedom, now I can start to live again. And that's religion. Religion's meant to do that. It's meant to open you up to this world of objective value. So there, I think, too, wokeism stands athwart religion. And the more people are drawn into its morass, I think that the more they're going to want to get out of it. So, I think to that degree it's played a role.
Many are also pointing to young people's desire for a return to tradition, and they're using the word tradition. Bishop, what do you think that the younger generations find attractive about tradition, especially since the usual narrative is the young people reject tradition, the old people try and preserve it. But we're seeing we're actually seeing the reverse sociologically right now.
Yeah, and of course, part of that, Gabe, is that young people tend to be rebellious by their nature, so whatever the current thing is, they're going to go against it. So if the current thing is Casey versus Planned Parenthood, well, then they're going to rebel in the direction of tradition. But I think, more substantively, it's that tradition represents this accumulation of objective value that's been preserved, and the church presents it. Now, it doesn't mean some simple-minded traditionalism, whereby I'm afraid of the modern world and everything modern is bad. Well, no. But what you do is you immerse yourself in a great tradition, so you learn it, you benefit from it, and then maybe you can actually contribute to it by creating your own version of it, or you can appreciate people today who are involved in the good, the true, and the beautiful. So I don't want some retreat behind, as Karl Barth said, Chinese walls. I mean, the church should always be out engaging the world. But I get the affection for tradition, sure, because it's objective value. And the wokest Casey versus Planned Parenthood world is spiritually a desert. Mm-hmm. It's a desert spiritually, and people, they realize that in time. So then they begin looking. Well, what's been denied me? What have I not seen? What wasn't taught, and they'll open up these treasure troves of the tradition.
What about the liturgy in particular? What do you think young people are finding attractive about more reverent, more pious forms of worship now?
I think it's mysticism, for want of a better term. They want a real living contact with God, and the liturgy is, of course, meant to do that. And it does it aesthetically, it does it ritualistically, it does it through gesture and through movement and through word and through sacrament and all the things that we're used to. But it's meant to awaken a sense of God, of the transcendent, of the mystical. And the wokest world talk about the buffered self and the self is collapsed in upon itself. I mean, it's a desert. And so whenever the mystical is offered to you, you're going to respond to it, I think. I think last night I did a liturgy here in town, and I'm a great devotee of incense. And I don't know what it is, but for me, the use of incense always awakens me to a sense of the transcendent mystery. as the smoke rises, so symbolically going up. But there's something about the smoke. I don't know. It's primordial to me, the smell of it and the texture of it, and the way it plays against the environment. And it puts me in a mystical frame of mind. It just does. Now, maybe not everybody. I get it. I mean, some people start coughing, But for me, it's part of the Catholic heritage liturgically, and it goes all the way back to the Jewish temple, and that's a very old liturgical move. But it speaks of the mystical side of life. Yeah. Again, I grew up in the age of the guitars and banners and balloons liturgy, and I get it. People were trying to be relevant and make the young people are bored, and so let's get them involved. I get it. That was the rationale. I understand. But it's there's a banality to it, and it didn't speak to these deeper longings of the heart. And liturgy is mysterious. It's not entertainment, not meant to entertain you every minute. It's meant to awaken, it's open this door. It's open this deep place in you of contact with God. And I think people are responding to that in the more traditional forms of liturgy.
One of the most deep liturgical experiences I had was actually in the dedication of your chapel here in Rochester. It was the first time I saw the dedication of an altar.
Yeah.
And the work of I guess, anointing it with oil, right? It was such a profound experience for all of us there to see this is something holy that's happening. Some work is being done.
And then you place that brazier on top and let it smoke for a
long time. Yeah.
We had to turn off the smoke alarms, in the building. But I mean, all that stuff, it's inchoate. It's hard to articulate. It's hitting you at a deep sort of archetypal level. I remember Cardinal George, this long before I was a bishop, he was dedicating an altar, and he said, the key to dedicating an altar, you put a lot of oil on it. You soak it in oil. You drown it in oil. I remember he told me that. So I always think of that, and I've done that now several times as a bishop, and drown it in oil. And that's a very ancient idea of the anointed stone. Think of Jacob and his dream.
Exactly.
The anointed stone is the point of contact with God. But those things speak. That's what the liturgists of my youth didn't understand. They were rationalists, actually, and that's a mark of modernity, is a hyper-rationalism. We were very big into explaining things. I remember having a commentator come out and explain what's going on, and then explain the readings. And okay, I get it, but there's a rationalism there where a lot of things that are really deep in life you can't quite explain. They're weird. They're resonant at a much deeper level it's beyond reason, or it's prior to reason or something. When we explicitate everything, put it under the bright light and let's talk about it and analyze it, that appeals to one dimension of the mind, but it doesn't appeal to the soul the same way.
Right.
Do you remember Joseph Campbell? It was very big, 30-some years ago. And Campbell, I disagree with him in a lot of ways, but to me, he was fascinating because he knew the myths and the religions of the whole world. And he was a Catholic, and he sort of fell away from the church, but he was raised a Catholic. He said he thought the worst thing that we did in the Catholic Church was, he said, you turned the Mass into a Julia Child cooking show. And what he meant was, Julia Child, maybe our viewers don't remember who Julia Child was, she was a cooking show. Now watch what I'm doing. I'm going to do this. I'll put this in, put that in. Now look, that everything was under the bright light, able to be seen. Well, okay, but Campbell's insight was, but that mystical ritual is never like that. It's in any culture. It's never like, let me just put it right out here. It's something weird and elusive. And what are they doing? And just the other night, I was for this celebration of the Council of Nicaea. I was at the Greek Orthodox Church here in town. Right. And of course, there you see, there's the iconostasis that blocks access to the Holy of Holies. And when the consecration's going on, you don't see anything. You might see smoke arising from behind that's the Jerusalem temple. Well, what's going on? Can't I see it? Well, no, maybe it's not meant to be seen, Now, I'm painting in broad brushes here, but you get the point. Sure. that element of the mystical belongs in the liturgy. And I think young people indeed are longing for that.
Bishop, when you describe this, I love the term banners and balloons Catholicism, and the hyper rationalism. When I started, I had my first memories of Mass, I can see sort of the tail end of that, and then the early sort of transition to where we are now. But was there ever popular buy-in to that liturgy, or was this just something imposed from above? Because the liturgies we're seeing now, there's great popular buy-in to them.
Yeah, I don't think so in the beginning. I think it was seen as something, okay, there's a new mass, and now we're going to, I remember my father, I'm 8, 9 years old at this point, and it was the first time we had a guitar group at mass, and they were singing, kind of folk songs. And I remember my father, who was not really an aesthetically minded person at all, but he was like, because he would have been raised completely on the preconciliar church, and I don't know what's going on. I think it probably was more imposed, from on high. I don't think it welled up naturally. Now, let me contrast my father and my mother here. I asked my mother not too long before she died, so not many years ago, and I said, "Now, Mom, would you ever want to go back to the old liturgy?" And she went, "Oh, no, I like that. I can understand the mass." I mean, so I'm not really calling for some nostalgic renewal of, let's go back to 1952. But elements, dimensions of it, I think young people are responding to, indeed.
A couple more reasons we can look at. One is the church's moral teachings, especially those pertaining to the purpose of sexuality, marriage, and the traditional family. So historically, both those outside of the church and inside the church have argued for a long time those teachings are repelling young people. But we're actually seeing the opposite now. Is that something you find?
To me, it's a very interesting question, and we'd have to look at a lot of angles, because it is true, I think, if you look at surveys, what don't young people respond to? Why is the church so mean to gays, and why are you against divorce and birth control and all this stuff? So there is that, I think, immediate reaction. But I think what you're driving at, and what I agree with you, we have all around us now casualties of the sexual revolution.
Right.
So when I was a little kid, I was like a little kid in the 60s when the revolution commences. And what was the promise? The promise was liberation from taboos, liberation from oppression. You can be free to live your life. The birth control pill, you don't have to worry about, pregnancy. And so, it's time for real sexual liberation. Well, reread now Humanae Vitae from 1968. Yeah. And not just precisely about birth control, but read the wider analysis. It is incredibly prescient document, I think, about what will happen when we simply open up the sexual arena to, whatever you want to do. It's produced, I think, the walking wounded in our culture. The sexual life, like the whole of life, is meant to be ordered according to moral principles that are not oppressive. They're not imposed on us by wicked, tyrannical people. They're the structure for the moral life that emerges from a reasonable reflection upon human nature, right? We call that the natural law, reverenced by eons of human experience. And it's a way of saying, this is going to make you happier. Mm-hmm. This is in line with your own deepest instincts and your own nature. When we say, forget all that, do whatever you want, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, wokeism, you are then going to have a battlefield filled with the walking wounded and the spiritually dead. So I do think those who've been so negatively affected by the sexual revolution are indeed gravitating toward the religions that say, no, there's a structure and order, to your sexual life. Show me someone who's really been liberated by the sort of, playboy, I'm dating myself there, the playboy mentality from the 60s and 70s, or the anything goesism of today, or the I define my own sexuality. Show me someone that's really liberated by that. I think you see a lot of prisoners.
Right, yeah, no, casualties is the right word, yes. So, Bishop, we've been spending some time examining some potential causes to this great resurgence of interest in Catholicism, which is all great news. And the next show, we're going to be looking at some suggestions for how to preserve and augment that momentum.
Yeah, good.
But it's important to recognize that we don't want to sort of oversell this good news. It remains the case that these are initial trends. They're incipient. Hopefully they continue, but they may not. And the reality is the church has lost a lot of ground over the years in terms of its cultural influence and just the sheer number of people who are attending Mass. So to sort of give some sobriety to this conversation. What are some real challenges you see for us evangelically right now and in the near-term horizon?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we can get a little bit giddy about this maybe.
Right.
Because after so many years of bad news, we've been hearing declining numbers. What we're noticing is kind of a slight reversal, or maybe we've stopped the momentum downward, but we really haven't commenced a grand, evangelical renewal. It's the beginning of something, and we should celebrate that. But at the same time, we got a real fight in our hands here, and we do have a still very aggressive secularist culture. The self-invention culture is still very much on the march. What John Paul II called the culture of death. Well, in many ways, that's a function of the self-invention. If I can determine my whole life, I can, whatever I want, whatever is convenient to me and my purposes. Well, that results in this culture of death, and it results in this arid spiritual space. So that remains a very potent opponent that we have. So we shouldn't underplay that. A particular challenge now, I do think, is this AI business, which is opening. We've talked about it, of course, in one of our shows. It opens up a lot of negative features along with good things. But one, I think, is just the confusion about what's real and what isn't.
Right.
I struggle with this. People do these crazy AI versions of me that are saying all kinds of ridiculous things. I find now I go online and I'm like, I don't know, is that real? There's some news. Wait a minute, that's not news. Someone just made that up. Or
right.
he said what? Well, that's not really him saying that. That's a problem we're facing. It's it's like the demonic distortion of something that's good. The church has appeared online to be a voice leading people, but now that voice is getting confusing or confused. So that's an issue that we face, I think, is the AI problem. But this still very rampant culture of self-invention is still beguiling the minds and hearts of a lot of young people. And so the church has got to keep, fighting that fight.
What about religious freedom? This is an area that you're working on, especially right now. Is this one of your concerns?
Yeah, I'm on this presidential commission on religious liberty, and it manifests itself in a lot of ways. This problem of the suspension of religious liberty, but one way is that Christianity is under assault. I mean, there's no question about it.
Right.
Go worldwide. First of all, we are by far the most persecuted religion, by far, around the world. Doesn't get the press it deserves, but you go to countries around in Africa and Asia and various places. Christians, especially Catholics, are really under intense persecution. In our country, here's a stat. In the last, I believe it's 7 years, since 2018, attacks on Catholic churches, so vandalism, arson, attacks on Christian individuals have increased 700% from 2018 till today. And if you widen the scope a bit and you go back some more years, attacks on Christianity in general have been dramatically on the upswing in our country. Well, where's that coming from? Well, you mentioned the scandals and various things. But I do think it's, if you want, the militant wing of the culture of self-invention understands we're the principal enemy.
Right.
The only enemy that really has institutional substance would be the great classical religions, especially Catholicism. So I'm not surprised that this more militant side of the self-invention culture is going after us. And, sometimes in very explicitly violent ways.
Right.
God knows it exists around the world, and to some degree it exists even in our country. That's a major problem that Christianity faces.
It's also taking the coercive form of suppressing speech. As you know, now in the UK, for example, you can get arrested for posting quotations from the Catechism online.
I know.
How do we respond to that?
I don't know. That's something I really worry about. We have the First Amendment, at least it's being enforced for the moment, about free speech. And the Brits don't really have that in the same way. And that's why they're more vulnerable on this score, I think. Because as the wokeist perspective takes over, that's what's happening, is you say something that's slightly out of line with the orthodox wokeist position, you can indeed be arrested. And to me, it's very chilling. Because in many ways, let's face it, England is the mother country. It's the mother culture for us in many ways. Our common law tradition and our democracy, comes from a British model.
That's right.
It's the country of the Magna Carta, after all, And yet it's a very severe attack on freedom of speech. And look, we're used to it in our country that people say all kinds of things that we don't like. But all right, it's freedom of speech within reason, But what's happening in England is I find very unnerving. And I always go back, Matt, I don't know if you remember this, but 1990s, it was Richard John Neuhaus, founder of First Things, right? Leading Catholic public intellectual, who said, the day is coming when the teaching of classical Christian morality will be construed as hate speech. And I remember vividly at the time, everyone, left, center, and right, like, oh, Richard, come on. How hysterical. Stop it. Come on. Well, it happened. It happened. And it's happened in spades. It's happened in a way that even Richard John Neuhaus didn't envision. And that is downright frightening. And if it's happening in England, we got to be very vigilant here in our country.
Right. It can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Well, in our next show, we'll turn back to some happy topics. We'll be looking at how we can preserve the momentum.
But it's good. I'm glad because it is good to be clear-eyed about this and to be properly moderate about it. That we're not just going to get giddy about this thing, but we've still got a fight in our hands.
Well, it's now time for our listener question.
Okay.
Today we have Rick from New York asking about what you find most effective, Bishop, in reaching and making an initial evangelical impact on young people.
Okay.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name's Rick. I'm a confirmation coordinator in upstate New York. First of all, thank you so much for what you do. Love your videos. Second of all, what have you found to be the most effective, impactful way to take young people from 0 to 1, or to get them really engaged intellectually? And what I stand to learn here could be the most important thing that I absorb intellectually in my entire life. What's step one in your book?
Yeah, but good. I think what I said just a few minutes ago is allowing their questions naturally to arise. So think of Jesus on the road to Emmaus, right? What are you talking about? So he doesn't start catechizing right away. He says, well, what are you guys talking about as you go along the way? Oh, well, haven't you heard about? And then they talk. Whatever the version is, and if you're dealing with confirmation kids, high school kids, what are you guys talking about? What's on your mind? And if you want to give it a little explicit religious direction, hey, what question do you have about the church, or what bugs you about the church, or how come you're not coming to church? And they might not be able at first to articulate it, but let the questions naturally arise from them. And then you're responding to real questions they have, not just giving them information that they're not interested in yet. It's like, I often use the example of teaching a sport to kid. You get them out on the field, just start playing baseball or tennis, or just hitting the ball around, or golf, just start swinging the club. And then the questions naturally arise. Like, oh, wait a minute, how come that shot went to the right, or how come that ball, I got past me, and what did I do wrong? So the same with religion, I think, is let the questions naturally arise, and then have some answers. I think part of the problem is, for a long time, oh, that's a really good question. And well, a lot of people say different things about it. I'm not quite sure what the answer. That's not helpful. I think people want real direction. But my bet is human beings are naturally curious about religion. Let that surface and then go from there.
Well, thank you, Rick, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question on a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. That's askbishopbarron.com. We always love to hear from you. Well, that's all the time we have for today, Bishop. Thanks for this expansive and very insightful conversation.
God bless you, Matt. Thanks.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ and become a better evangelist with and for others and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.